Bam, bim, bidi, bam, bim, bidi, bim, bim, bam. Bim, bam, bim, bidi, bam, bim, bidi, bim, bim, bam. Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat shalom. Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat shalom.
Nog Sachen, ich meine, Rachmon Islam. Moshiach Moshem Kubus, du
Nee,
musst
allemaal
in der Kude. Nicht der Mensch. Noch von was sie das?
That scene over there, it's typical of almost any East European country. But would you believe it? It's not Europe. It's happening right here on the streets of New York City. Those men are Jews, but they're not foreigners. In fact, the first Jews migrated here over 100 years before the Revolutionary War. And like any other Americans, at this very moment, those men might be discussing the president's energy policy, or business, politics, religion, or any number of issues in which we're all interested. Judaism is as American as apple pie. Now, some people might call Judaism a nation, or a race, or a religion. But the fact remains that Judaism, more than anything else, is an all-encompassing way of life. Well, there are Oriental Jews, and black Jews, and red-haired Jews like me. And there are also Jewish soldiers. Now, today we're going to discover why the Jewish soldier can be proud of his heritage, because of the part it's played in American military history.
According to the Bible, Judaism began with a man named Abraham, who entered into a covenant with God, a promise not to bow down to the idols worshipped by others, but to honor God alone. Judaism gave the world monotheism, the belief in one God. In return, the Bible tells us God promised that he would fashion a great nation out of Abraham's descendants who maintained the covenant. The prophecy was fulfilled through Abraham's grandson Jacob, later called Israel. And to this very day, the term children of Israel is commonly used to describe Israel's descendants and their followers.
Whatever they're called, regardless of nationality, race, etc., all Jews have three things in common: history, religion, and tradition. It's often difficult to discern where one area stops and another begins, because more times than not, they overlap. Religion and tradition and history. Now, the earliest records of all three are clearly spelled out in the various books of what the Christians call the Old Testament in the Bible. The first 5 books are believed to have been revealed by God to Moses and are called the Torah. A new Torah must be handwritten by a scribe according to strict rules and always on parchment, a job that takes over a year to do. But Jews consider this a necessary task, a sign of reverence for this most holy object, and a way of meticulously preserving the integrity of the original text. For should a letter be added or missing, the scroll is unfit for use. The Torah not only includes the 10 Commandments, it also contains what the Jew believes to be the 613 precepts or commandments, both positive and negative, by which Jews live. It serves as the basis upon which all Jewish theology, law, custom, and ceremony is built. And it chronicles all known early Jewish history. The Torah tells us about creation, Noah's Ark, the Tower of Babel, the saga of the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, of bondage in Egypt, and of Moses and the Exodus. These and dozens of other stories, histories, ethics, and laws are some of the most exciting and adventurous accounts in literature. So dramatic, in fact, that a casual reader might be tempted to believe that they are merely the figments of the writer's overly zealous imagination. Now, archaeologists have proven that most of the history outlined in the Torah really happened. And what hasn't been proved, well, it hasn't been disproved either. Where tragedy is concerned, Jews have had more than their share. War, fierce persecution, and indescribable prejudice culminating in the Holocaust. They've all done much to scatter the children of Israel across the globe. But wherever they've gone, Jews have bravely maintained their religious beliefs, in spite of the pain and suffering it has cost them. Even in a climate of hostility, Jews have done more than survive. They've maintained a sense of humor. There's a joke in the Jewish folk musical Fiddler on the Roof, where a character is praying after experiencing a particularly frustrating ordeal. Lord, I know we're the chosen people, but couldn't you choose somebody else for a change? The Jews have made positive contributions in science, business, communication, literature, and art. And through all of this, God has miraculously intervened to champion Israel's cause. By the Middle Ages, Jews were dispersed throughout Europe. But in the midst of one persecution, the Spanish Inquisition, Jewish property was seized, Jews were tortured, imprisoned, and executed. It was conversion or else. And of course, those who were able fled for their lives. One group managed to migrate to Holland. Later, in 1654, they settled here, in New York, when the city was still called New Amsterdam. Throughout the early years of American colonization and revolution, the Christian religion was dominant numerically. New World Jews were content to keep to themselves, living and worshiping as they had for centuries.
For the most part, Jews are a peaceful and peace-loving people. But we're not professional pacifists, and American Jews are intensely, fiercely loyal to this country. But then why shouldn't we be? The United States of America is one of the few spots on the face of this earth that has historically opened its arms to us, that has permitted Jews to worship as we please. And that's the reason I know that we are willing to fight to protect that right, that freedom of religion, and in fact have done so in every American war from the Revolution on.
Hear, O Israel, today you are to meet the enemy. Do not be faint-hearted. Do not fear. Do not tremble. Be not troubled because of them. The Lord your God goes with you to fight for you against your enemies. His presence will bring you victory.
Jews fought in the early American wars, and they fought well. But their military activities were augmented by zealous financial and industrial support, without which many believe the revolution could not have been won. In fact, Chaim Solomon was one of the most important financiers serving the revolutionary cause. It might be interesting to note the nails used in the construction of the USS Constitution were made by Jews. And when Paul Revere badly needed copper to line the hulls of ships for the Continental Army, he turned to a Jewish family in New York, who eagerly supplied the government with all the copper they needed. Profit mongers? Not quite. In fact, a few years later, when a nearly bankrupt Congress was attempting to finance the War of 1812, the Jews of America, including the Hendrickses, came forward and without hesitation supplied all the funds necessary. The Hendrickses did this anonymously, in spite of the fact that no other lending body anywhere considered the U.S. government a reliable risk. When asked to comment on their generosity, one member of the family merely replied, "We're Americans. There was nothing else to do." Although more and more Jews found their way to American shores, they continued to maintain a low profile, particularly where military life was concerned, because the European experience had historically put Jews in the army as punishment for 20 years to life. Then came the Civil War, And like the Protestants and Catholics, the Jews wanted religious support for their fighting men from within their own ranks. In other words, Jewish chaplains for Jewish soldiers. Sound reasonable? Today maybe, but in 1861 it was against the law. And it took an act of Congress to allow non-Christian chaplains to minister to military personnel. President Abraham Lincoln spearheaded the bill himself. When it was signed in July of 1862, it not only provided for a Jewish military chaplaincy, it also specified how ministers from all faiths must qualify as Army chaplains. And I quote, "Each must be recommended from some authorized ecclesiastical body, or by not less than 5 accredited ministers belonging to said denomination." The ecclesiastical body that recommends men for the Jewish chaplaincy? It's called the JWB Commission on Jewish Chaplaincy.
There are 3 movements in Judaism: Orthodox, Conservative, and Reform. Basically, Orthodox Jews follow the laws of the Jewish tradition to the letter. Conservative Jews are more liberal in their interpretation, and Reform Jews even more liberal in their beliefs and practices. The Commission and the Jewish chaplain must serve all 3. Besides endorsing chaplains, we at the JWB do our best to help the soldier practice Judaism within the military environment. We have a complete in-house printing and literature distribution system. The JWB Lecture Bureau distributes films and provides lecture programs.
The Jewish community in particular.
And to top it off, our archives hold millions of documents relating to the work of chaplains and lay leaders in the military.
Shalom, JWB. I'm sorry, the parties are in the office. Can I take a message?
Today, the JWB has a broad range of activities on a national basis. However, it was founded in 1917 to serve the spiritual and cultural needs of Jewish persons in the military. Freedom. Freedom to live and worship as one chooses. Like a magnet, it drew people from homes and families to drink America's precious cup. But freedom has its costs, and the Jews have always been willing to pay.
I was anti-military. You know, in my old country, putting you into the army was considered punishment. Yeah, that's one of the main reasons I immigrated to the United States. I became a citizen 3 years later, at the beginning of 1917. I never dreamed that just a month or 2 after, the United States would be involved in a world war and I'd be called upon to fight. Somehow, it didn't matter to me. No, because after I saw what this country had to offer, I was willing to fight for it. Yeah.
In my case, I was the only Jew in a company of 249 men. And the sergeant was a member of the Ku Klux Klan. Huh? And the Klan was very big at that time. Anti-Negro, anti-Catholic, anti-Semitic. And this sergeant singled me out and made my life miserable, gave me more than my share of dirty jobs. Well, I took it for a while, but it got aggravating, frustrating, made me very angry. I can't recall a worse experience. I tell you, just talking about it brings back some of those painful feelings. So one evening, I got these feelings off my chest to the chaplain. And he listened. He said he would talk to the captain the next morning. And the very next day, the sergeant started to treat me like a real human being, even though he didn't like to. Well, from that time on, as far as I was concerned, the rabbi could do no wrong.
There are thousands of stories of prejudice in the service. But interestingly enough, the melting pot created by races and religions being thrust together in the military often eliminated bigotry. Why? Because they were able to see the other guy at close range. They got to know one another.
I was a WAC stationed at Fort Dix. I never held much truck for Jews until Christmas came around, and I saw hundreds of them give up their holiday furlough so that more Catholics and Protestants could be with their families. I kept asking myself, would I have been big enough to do the same sort of thing for them?
Yes, I've been subjected to religious discrimination occasionally, but it was individual, not institutional discrimination. It was primarily what I would call a lack of sensitivity or knowledge of Judaism on the part of the individuals that I felt were discriminating. It obviously hasn't impeded me in any way. I've advanced from private to Major General in the United States Army. So it would be less than fair, uncharitable, for me to say that anyone in the Army or the soldiers with whom I've served have held me back in any way. In the Army, you seldom have an opportunity to choose whom you will serve with or whom you will lead. So you take people at face value. You're only going to deal with a relatively small group of people, a platoon, a section, company, battalion, and if you don't make the most effective and harmonious use of those individuals, then obviously you're cheating yourself as well as the Army.
During the Second World War, about one-half of the eligible rabbis in this country offered themselves for the chaplaincy. 422 were accepted, and each was responsible for ministering to approximately 2,000 Jews. The Jewish war ministry was unique. You see, Jews view their rabbis as teachers and preachers rather than as priests and prophets. So it's a job of a rabbi who is a chaplain to show his troops how best to practice their faith within the military environment. For instance, take kashrut, the complex Jewish dietary laws, which include not eating meat with milk products and forsaking meats from non-kosher animals. Well, in combat, practicing a kosher diet can be pretty difficult when your company's low on rations. Or take the yarmulke, the traditional headpiece worn by some Jews to show respect and humility before God. The yarmulke itself isn't what matters. Any head covering is appropriate. Even your cap or helmet can serve in its place. Besides teaching, it's also the Jewish chaplain's job to provide religious services for the soldiers in the most authentic and appropriate circumstances the situation will allow.
"6 million Jews murdered, and millions more awaiting their fate in the death camps. For many, liberation came too late. Others would die of malnutrition and disease before medical attention could reach them. And for others who wanted only to escape the memories of their sordid surroundings, there was the problem of finding new homes and new starts. Meeting the needs of their stricken brothers after World War II was perhaps the greatest task the American Jewish soldier had ever faced. One chaplain wrote, "We begged, borrowed, and now it can be admitted stole large quantities of clothing so that these victims of Nazi madness could discard the rags of their nightmare." Abraham Pfeffer, a 17-year-old Jewish lad from Poland, was an emaciated corpse when he was rescued by an American Jewish chaplain at Dachau. Amidst a pile of dead bodies, his movements were spotted. He regained his health, learned English, and became an interpreter for the U.S. forces. He went to the United States, completed his education, and joined the Army as a chaplain himself. 10 years after his rescue by a chaplain, he became one, to repay a debt for my life. Besides the burial of the liberated dead, Jewish soldiers, and particularly their chaplains, did all they could to reconnect families, establish synagogues and orphanages, and to transport and often smuggle the displaced persons into Palestine. There's an ironic twist to this chain of events. The gruesome war which stole the homes and lives of so many Jews also served as a sort of catalyst that spearheaded a movement for a new Jewish nation. Palestine became Israel, home of the children of Israel.